Bryce Sutherland's knuckles split against marble when he drove Lila Moreno's head into the courthouse evidence counter, and the crack of bone on stone snapped through Annex B like a starter pistol. She kept hold of the transfer form anyway. White paper, county seal, black line where her name waited. Language that said Atlas would be surrendered as bite case evidence by emergency order. Her right hand trembled but did not open. Bryce's left hand fisted in her intake scrubs at the collarbone, hauling her forward again, and the second impact blurred her vision into hard white sparks. She tasted copper. The counter edge pressed a groove along her cheekbone. A laminated sign beside her elbow read, "Evidence intake. Chain of custody is the law," and she had a clean, absurd thought that somebody had polished that sign more recently than they had checked the signatures on the forms stacked behind it. "Sign it," Bryce said. His breath smelled like mint and whiskey trying to hide each other. He wore expensive sunglasses at 3 a.m. under courthouse fluorescence, $400 frames reflecting her own face back at her in shards. He was 24 and built like a private trainer's client, broad in the shoulders, no scar tissue anywhere visible, leather jacket still beaded with rain from the short walk-in from the parking garage. The hand on her throat climbed, thumb finding the hinge under her jaw, fingers spreading across her windpipe with practiced pressure that said this was not his first time putting someone there. Lila tried to answer and got only a scraping sound. He squeezed harder. The chain lead wrapped around her wrist bit down to skin as Atlas threw his weight against it once, then stopped. Not because he was calm, because he had been trained to hold until command, and training sat in him deeper than pain. The German shepherd stood 6 feet away at the end of a temporary tie-off ring, bolted near the intake gate, 88 pounds of tan and black saddleback that looked almost golden in daylight and almost iron under the courthouse nightlights. Now his coat was dark as storm metal. His ears rotated forward and locked. His body went rigid from shoulder to tail. A low growl started in his chest, not loud, just steady, like thunder too far away to count seconds yet. Lila's airway narrowed to a straw. She felt each heartbeat in her throat where Bryce's fingers pressed. Only air mattered, and she could not pull enough of it in. 14 people watched. 2 bailiffs stood near the annex doors, keys clipped to belts, arms folded in the practiced posture of men who had decided a thing was administrative, not urgent. 3 clerks sat behind frosted glass stations with intake stamps and plastic evidence bins. 6 law interns lined the hallway wall with tablets and legal pads, waiting to observe overnight warrant processing, all of them in press shirts and anxious shoes. A night custodian held a mop by the vending machines and stared at the floor drain. A deputy at the metal detector shifted his weight and looked at the ceiling camera instead of at Lila's face turning color by the second. Nobody moved. An intern with a blue tie lowered his eyes to his screen and resumed scrolling depositions notes with his thumb, as if this were noise from a neighboring office. One bailiff glanced at his partner, then away, the way people look when they are waiting for someone with more rank to choose courage first. The custodian rolled the mop once, back and forth over the same clean tile, hands shaking. Somewhere farther down the corridor, a printer spit out 3 pages and stopped. The annex smelled of wet wool, copier toner, burnt coffee, disinfectant, and the metallic tang of fear. "Last chance," Bryce said, tightening. "You sign, he goes in county custody, and this goes away." Lila heard the words, but could not shape her own. She had worked trauma bays with ruptured spleens, chest tubes, and shattered femurs. She had watched bodies come back from the edge and bodies fail to come back while monitors screamed. She knew exactly what oxygen starvation did in stages, and the knowledge was no comfort now. Her fingers tried to pry his hand loose and found tendon, and polished skin and no give. Her left knee buckled. The transfer form folded, then tore at the corner where her thumb dug in. Atlas shifted one paw. Chain links clicked against the ring. Bryce looked at the dog and smiled without warmth. "You see?" he said to the room, voice carrying. "Aggressive posture, dangerous property. This is why the order exists." He said property as if he was naming law itself. Lila's vision tunneled. At the edge of it, she caught the evidence shelves behind the counter, sealed bags with case numbers, tagged clothing, 2 boxed hard drives, a dented helmet, a child's backpack in clear plastic, and 3 syringes in a biohazard tray awaiting transfer. Her brain tried to file details because details were how truth survived institutions that wanted it blurred. Time on the wall clock, 3:07 a.m., annex monitor, light blinking red. Deputy's body cam dock charging, not active. Bryce's right cuff wet, a dark crescent stain that smelled faintly medicinal when he moved. Atlas's growl deepened a half step. Lila had known this corridor for 6 months, had worked intake nights when judges signed emergency holds, and everyone called it routine because routine felt cleaner than power. She had logged retired MWDs arriving under the wrong labels, had seen behavioral instability stamped onto dogs with combat records and old shrapnel injuries, had watched paperwork reroute them into private contracts where nobody tracked retirement, and nobody asked why some never came back. She had started copying everything, every discrepancy, every erased time, every swapped tag. She had not told many people. In Cedar Falls, records had a way of disappearing when a family name sat on enough buildings. Bryce's surname sat on plenty. "My father chairs the hospital board," he told her, leaning close enough that his sunglasses touched her temple. "My dad owns this courthouse." The deputy at the detector heard him and did nothing. Lila's hearing narrowed to pulse and growl and the fluorescent hum overhead. She thought of the duplex kitchen with the dinosaur magnet collection on the fridge. Her nephew's homework spread in crooked piles beside a bottle of hand sanitizer she always forgot to cap. She thought of Atlas on the clinic floor the first week she met him, left hips stiff from old Kandahar shrapnel, watching every doorway until Sam Barrett returned from a call, then exhaling as if he had been holding air for both of them. She thought, with sudden, clean certainty, that if she signed this form tonight, Atlas would vanish into the same private pipeline as the other retired dogs she had been tracking, and the paperwork would call it lawful. Bryce jostled her forward again. Her forehead struck the marble a 3rd time. Sound first, pain second. Someone gasped. Not help, just sound. A clerk near Station 2 lifted a phone from the cradle, held it, then set it down without dialing. The bailiff closest to the door shifted one foot as if testing whether intervention might damage his career. The intern in the blue tie kept scrolling. The custodian whispered a prayer under his breath and kept mopping a dry tile square. 14 witnesses. Not one hand between Bryce's fingers and Lila's throat. Atlas's ears pinned forward so hard they looked cut from wood. His weight came onto his front legs. Every line in him drew tight. The chain groaned against the wall ring, metal taking load. His growl rolled louder now, not frantic, not wild, the controlled warning of a military dog who had learned rooms, exits, and threat vectors before most people in the room had learned to file motions. Lila forced one breath through a narrowing gap and heard herself make a raw, small sound that barely counted as a word. "Atlas!" Bryce heard it too. He laughed, a short, cruel burst that bounced off marble and glass. "Call him," he said. "He bites. He gets put down faster." He had no idea what kind of dog stood at that chain. He had no idea what that growl meant in places where men had lived or died by it. He had no idea that old wounds did not weaken loyalty. They tempered it. Lila's knees hit tile. Bryce's hand followed her down, still locked at her throat, forcing her chin up. The torn transfer form slipped from her grip and skated under the counter gate, stopping against a bin marked Pending Verification. The Blue County seal stared up at the ceiling light like an eye. Atlas went absolutely still. That stillness frightened her more than the growl. From the corridor beyond security, boots struck wet tile in an even cadence, heavy and unhurried, and the sound changed the room before the man appeared, as if consequence itself had turned the corner and was walking straight toward Annex B. Then Sam Barrett stepped through the security arch. He came in wearing Navy NWU Type 3 camouflage, darkened by winter rain, sleeves rolled to the wrist, jaw scar pale against stubble, shoulders squared not for display but for function, the posture of a man who had spent half his life entering rooms where the next 3 seconds decided who went home. Water tapped off the hem of his blouse onto courthouse tile. He did not raise his voice. He did not hurry. He just looked once at Lila on her knees, once at Bryce's hand on her throat, once at the chain cutting Atlas's wrist, and the entire annex lost its practiced indifference. The deputy at the detector stopped pretending to study the ceiling camera. One bailiff uncrossed his arms. A clerk's stamp slipped from her hand and hit the desk with a flat plastic click. The intern in the blue tie finally looked up from his tablet and saw what everyone else saw at the same moment. Not a citizen upset over paperwork, not a late-night petitioner, but a retired SEAL standing in wet camouflage at 3:07 a.m., with the kind of calm that meant he had already mapped exits, angles, and consequences. Bryce saw the uniform and tightened anyway. He yanked Lila higher by her throat, forcing her spine off balance, trying to reassert ownership in front of witnesses who were suddenly remembering they were witnesses. "This is court evidence intake," he snapped, not releasing pressure. "Stay in your lane." Lila heard it through cotton and static. Her vision pulsed at the edges. She could still feel the ripped corner of the surrender form against her palm, though it had skated away under the gate. Atlas gave one hard pull against the tie ring and stopped again, body locked, ears pinned forward so tight they looked welded there. The growl in his chest shifted registers at Sam's scent. From warning at random violence to targeted readiness, he knew his handler had arrived. He also knew no command had been given. Sam took one step closer. He did not look at the bystanders first. He looked at Bryce's grip, thumb placement, tendon tension, where pressure sat over trachea, how quickly Lila's knees were beginning to slide on polished tile. He looked at Atlas's chain angle, and the ring bolt in the wall, old steel with stress marks around one anchor screw. He looked at the deputy's empty hands and the inactive body cam dock and the red annex monitor light blinking over Station 3 like a pulse nobody wanted to acknowledge. He absorbed details the way other people breathed. At 3:08, the wall clock clicked forward and sounded louder than it should have. A woman in a charcoal suit came through the arch 2 steps behind him, legal bag in one hand, rein on her collar, hair pinned back for work that rarely ended before dawn. Nora Pike didn't speak right away. Her eyes moved from Lila's face to Bryce's wrist, to the torn form under the counter, and then to Sam. And something passed between them that looked less like conversation and more like mission confirmation. She set her bag on the nearest bench without breaking line of sight. Bryce tried a smile that had worked on clerks, interns, deputies, and city committee members for years. "You can all relax," he said to the room, voice rising. "This dog is violent, and she's obstructing a lawful surrender. My family has handled this already. Nobody answered. The custodian still held the mop, but he had stopped moving it. One bailiff touched the radio at his shoulder and then took his hand away. The clerk, who dropped the stamp, stared at Lila's fingers, clawing at Bryce's sleeve, and swallowed hard. The blue-tie intern's tablet dimmed and went dark in his hand. Fear had shifted shape in Annex B. 5 minutes ago, it was fear of crossing a name carved into buildings. Now it was fear of being remembered on the wrong side of this moment. Atlas's breathing changed. His ears rotated forward. His body went rigid from neck to tail. A low sound built in his chest, not frantic, not untrained, the precise restrained force of a decorated MWD waiting for instruction. The chain links trembled against the wall ring. Sam's right hand lifted 2 inches, palm down, a signal so small most civilians would miss it. Atlas saw it and held. That hold told its own history. Kandahar stairwells, Yemen rubble, hallway smoke, a dog choosing discipline, while the person he cared about ran out of air 3 yards away. Lila's field of vision narrowed to boots and shadows. She could see Sam's boots now, wet tread, planted shoulder-width apart between her and the annex doors. She tried to draw breath and got a splinter of it. Her throat burned. Her pulse hammered in Bryce's fingers. She thought of her nephew asleep under a blanket, with cartoon rockets. One sock always kicked halfway off, and fury pushed through the panic. She would not sign. She would not. Bryce leaned down toward her ear, still performing for the room. "You had your chance," he said. "You should have stayed useful." Sam closed the distance by one more step. That was all. One step. But it forced Bryce to tilt his chin up for the first time that night, and that tiny change exposed exactly what he had failed to read. Sam's expression did not carry anger, and it did not carry uncertainty. It carried calculation and finality, the winter-flat focus of a man who had survived enough chaos to distrust loud people and believe quiet ones. Bryce's bravado flickered, returned, flickered again. Nora picked up the fallen intake stamp from the clerk's desk and set it upright beside the logbook, deliberate, almost ceremonial. "Annex cameras are running," she said, voice even. "Everyone here should decide what they want, preserved on record." The sentence landed like a judge's gavel. The deputy by the detector finally moved his hand toward his radio. The bailiff nearest the doors took one step off the wall, and then another. The custodian lowered his mop and reached for his phone with fingers that shook less now than before. The blue-tie intern, face pale, reopened his tablet and angled it away from Bryce, not toward him. Cowardice was still in the room. So was self-preservation. But silence had cracked. Bryce squeezed Lila's throat again, harder because men like him always doubled down when they felt control slipping. Lila choked, sound tearing raw. Atlas surged once, chain snapping tight with a metallic bark that echoed down the corridor and brought every head around. Sam's hand stayed steady, palm down, command without words. Atlas froze in place, trembling with contained force, eyes fixed on Bryce's wrist. Nora stepped closer, close enough that Bryce had to divide his attention between the woman he was choking and the attorney documenting him with her own eyes. "On what authority are you putting hands on county medical intake staff?" she asked, each word clear enough for the cameras and every witness in Annex B. Bryce didn't answer. He kept squeezing. Sam's voice came low and level. "Deputy, mark the time." The deputy swallowed, keyed his radio, and finally spoke. A bailiff moved in from Bryce's blind side. Lila's fingers slipped, then found Bryce's cuff again, right where the dark medicinal stain had spread into the fabric. Atlas held the line, muscles quivering, waiting on command, while the room that had watched in silence began, second by second, to turn into a record. While the deputy stammered the time into his radio and the annex cameras kept recording, Lila's mind did what minds do when air runs thin and fear goes bright at the edges. It reached backward for the first place the story could have been stopped. Now let's go back to the beginning. Lila Moreno was 29, 5'6", wiry from long shifts and old military habits, with a medic's steady hands and a scar the size of a thumbnail along her left forearm from a field chest tube that went bad in rough weather. She had served as a Navy trauma medic long enough to learn the weight of silence after rotors powered down, and she came home with a duffel bag, a discharge packet, and a sleep pattern that broke at 2:13 most nights, no matter how tired she was. She took the county K-9 intake nurse job because it sounded procedural, predictable, clerical, with medicine attached. She told herself routine could be a kind of healing. She was wrong about routine, but not about purpose. Home was a rented duplex 2 miles from the courthouse, the kind with thin walls, a cracked mailbox post, and a kitchen light that hummed when the weather turned cold. The place always smelled like laundry soap and antiseptic wipes because she cleaned counters the way she had cleaned field stations, wiping corners twice and checking expiration dates on everything that could keep someone breathing. Her nephew, Mateo, was 9 and left blunt pencil marks on the table where he practiced spelling words in heavy block letters. He lined up dinosaur magnets on the fridge in strict species categories and resorted them whenever life felt uncertain, which had been often since his mother died. Lila kept his school calendar, taped above the coffee maker beside a list of Atlas's medication times, and one photograph of her sister Elena laughing into wind she couldn't feel anymore. Elena had been 27 when a rain-slick highway folded 2 lanes into one bad second. The call came to Lila while she was still in uniform, 3 hours before dawn, and the chaplain's voice had that careful tone people use when they already know they are changing the architecture of someone else's life. Mateo had stood in a hospital corridor with superhero bandages on both knees and asked whether he could still bring his volcano project to school on Friday. Lila had said yes before she said anything else, because children ask for ordinary things when the world is splitting, and someone has to protect the ordinary first. By late winter, she had built their mornings into a disciplined choreography. Eggs at 6:10, Mateo's inhaler check at 6:18, lunch packed by 6:25, always 1 protein, 1 fruit, 1 note folded into the napkin. He liked the notes written as field mission updates. Objective: survive math quiz. Threat level: moderate. Extraction time: 3:15 p.m. He would grin and tuck them into his pocket like orders. At 6:40, if her shift started later, she sat on the front step with black coffee and reviewed intake logs on her phone before waking him fully. That was where she first noticed the pattern, not in some dramatic whistleblower moment, just in rows of data that did not line up. Retired MWDs arrived tagged as dangerous property. Transfer codes changed by 1 digit between intake and disposition. Sedation lots appeared in records with no veterinary countersign. Dogs with documented service injuries were listed as behavioral liabilities, then routed off county books into private security contracts administered through shell vendors with respectable names and hollow addresses. By the second week of March, she had started photographing every discrepancy with timestamp overlays and backing them up to an encrypted drive taped under the false bottom of Mateo's old art supply bin. She did not do it because she wanted to fight. She did it because she had treated too many bodies to pretend paperwork couldn't kill. The county kennel intake wing sat behind Court Annex B, 1 fluorescent corridor away from where judges signed emergency surrender orders after midnight. It smelled of bleach, wet concrete, and stressed animals trying not to show pain. Lila learned each retired dog by gait before she learned each by file. One shepherd leaned right because of an old pelvic plate. Another flinched at keys jingling near his left ear. Blast trauma no one had bothered to annotate. Two had matching calluses where harnesses had ridden through years of deployment, and both were marked high-risk aggression by someone who had never seen disciplined restraint. When Atlas first came through for a review hearing, she recognized him from his service profile before she saw the name on the chain card. 8 years old, 5 deployments, 23 live finds after blasts and collapse events, decorated after Yemen. Shrapnel embedded near the left hip from Kandahar, not operable without risking mobility. The photo in his file showed a younger dog in dust and heat, ears up, eyes hard with focus. The dog in front of her was older, heavier through the chest, and carried that same concentration like a lit wire. He watched every door. He watched every hand. He watched Sam Barrett most of all. Sam spoke little in intake halls. He signed where told, answered only what mattered, and stood in NWU Type 3 camouflage, as if he expected incoming even during clerical delays. Lila had seen veterans who performed toughness for room effect. Sam never did. His stillness came from somewhere expensive, and Atlas mirrored it, head high until Sam stepped away for a call, then breath held shallow until he returned. When Sam came back, Atlas exhaled in a long, controlled release that sounded almost human. That was when Lila understood the center of it. The dog was not property in waiting. The dog was a witness with fur. 3 days later, she found the first sedation entry that made no medical sense. Ketamine logged at 2:52 a.m. for an animal no vet had evaluated and no intake nurse had cleared. The signature line carried initials that looked like hers at a glance and collapsed under scrutiny. Same slant. Wrong pressure points. Somebody had practiced. She reported it up channel the way policy required. First to the night supervisor, then to county legal intake, then to internal compliance. The supervisor told her to stay in her lane. Internal compliance thanked her and asked for patience. County legal sent back a 1-sentence reply. Data inconsistency noted. No immediate action. By the first week of April, 2 more dogs were gone from the roster, with no discharge packets and no transfer transport logs. Their kennels were scrubbed before dawn. Lila stopped believing this was sloppiness and started treating it as organized theft backed by official signatures. At home, she hid that certainty from Mateo as long as she could. He was old enough to read stress, young enough to blame himself for it. So she kept routines intact. Tuesday, tacos. Thursday, library hour. Saturday, laundry folded together on the couch while he read aloud from space books and corrected her pronunciation of planetary moons with grave authority. On nights when court calls ran late, Mrs. Hahn from next door stayed with him and left sticky notes on the fridge in neat script. He ate all his soup. Cough mild at 8 p.m. Sleeping now. Lila carried those notes in her wallet, evidence of a small civilian alliance that still worked. She also carried a second wallet card she had printed herself. If anything happens to me, call Nora Pike. The number sat under it in block digits. Nora was a military defense attorney with a rainproof briefcase and a reputation for finding the one question institutions hoped nobody would ask. They had met at a veteran legal clinic 6 months earlier over stale coffee and chain of custody statutes. Nora had listened without interruption, while Lila laid out mislabels, missing dogs, and forged initials. Then she had said, document first, speak second. Patterns survive panic. Lila document. By late spring, she had 6 months of logs, 9 photographed intake forms with altered timestamps, 3 sedation entries that predated judicial authorization, and 1 hallway camera still she should never have been able to access, showing Bryce Sutherland entering restricted evidence storage at 2:51 a.m., carrying a soft veterinary case with amber vials visible through the mesh. She knew his name before she confirmed his face. Everyone in Cedar Falls knew his name. Bryce Sutherland was 24 and moved through institutions like a person walking room to room in his own house. His surname sat in brushed steel letters over the hospital wing where Elena died. It sat above the law school atrium, where interns learned prosecutorial ethics under donor plaques funded by the same foundation his father chaired. It sat on arts grants, scholarship dinners, emergency preparedness banners, and campaign invitations where nobody said the word power because everyone could already feel it in the room. Bryce wore designer sneakers and expensive sunglasses indoors at midnight hearings, as if lighting itself should adjust to him. He laughed through policy briefings. He called deputies by first name and judges by family nickname when cameras were off. By June, his drinking friends were interning in the district attorney's office and rotating through Annex B night dockets. He learned quickly which rules were load-bearing and which ones bent when he touched them. The first formal complaint against him in county records had been dismissed as insufficient corroboration after a valet reported Bryce struck him with a car door outside a charity gala. The second disappeared into mediation before filing. The third, involving unauthorized access to veterinary-controlled substances, got rewritten as a documentation misunderstanding after a hospital pharmacist recanted in language almost certainly drafted by counsel. In each case, a paper trail existed just long enough to reassure decent people that process had started, then thinned into administrative fog. Cedar Falls called it influence when they were being polite, and inevitability when they were being honest. Bryce's father, Grant Sutherland, chaired Sutherland Memorial Hospital's Oversight Board and sat on the Judicial Facilities, trust that funded courthouse renovation contracts, including Annex B's evidence intake modernization. His mother led the foundation that underwrote legal internships and endowed public interest fellowships whose recipients were expected to be grateful in visible ways. The family did not need to call in favors every day. Systems trained around them preemptively, like iron filings arranging around a magnet. When Lila filed her first full incident memo naming Bryce in relation to unauthorized sedation access, the memo routed to a clerk who played tennis at the same private club as 2 assistant prosecutors. It came back to her marked incomplete, insufficient witness reliability. She was the witness. She filed again with attached logs and timestamp stills. 2 days later, a deputy she had never met warned her in a hallway voice, "You're creating exposure for yourself." He did not threaten directly. Men inside protected systems rarely did. He just offered consequences as if they were weather. By mid-July, Bryce had shifted from ignoring her to targeting Atlas. He appeared unannounced during intake windows with performative concern and legal language half-learned from confident friends. He asked loaded questions near open microphones. "Has this animal shown unprovoked aggression? Is this chain control compliant? Are you comfortable being liable if he snaps?" Each question was bait for a record he could curate later. Atlas never took it. Atlas watched him with that unblinking military assessment that made careless men uneasy. The night Bryce tried to inject a sedative into a seized service dog in holding, Atlas intercepted by stepping between Bryce's hand and the kennel gate, teeth bared but controlled, contact never made. Lila documented exact distance, exact posture, Exact command sequence from Sam. Bryce documented none of that. He went straight to a friendly emergency physician, produced superficial scratches from an unrelated training yard scrape, and filed an assault complaint framing Atlas as an unstable attack animal. Within 48 hours, a bite case petition appeared with a language so polished it read, pre-written. Within 72, an emergency surrender order landed on a judge's desk during a thinly staffed night session in Annex B. That was how untouchability worked in Cedar Falls. Not through one dramatic conspiracy, but through 100 small alignments that made cruelty look procedural. The wrong clerk on the right shift, the deputy who looked up instead of over, the intern who kept scrolling. The form waiting with your name already typed. And at 3:08 a.m., with Bryce's hand still clamped on her throat, and Atlas trembling against a chain ring bolted to county tile, all of that history tightened into one corridor where consequence had finally walked in on wet boots. Sam kept his palm low and steady until Atlas's trembling eased by a fraction. Across the counter, Bryce's hand stayed locked at Lila's throat, thumb riding high under her jaw as he forced her back against steel. Lila pulled one thin inhale, then another that hitched short. The deputy at the wall finally keyed his radio and said, voice uneven, Annex B, active assault. Time mark 3:08, while the camera domes above intake kept recording without blinking. In that narrow gap of control, the old wound that ran Sam's life sat plain on his face for anyone in Annex B sober enough to read it. The scar along his jaw had faded to a pale seam, but it had never become just skin. It had become memory with texture. Hellman dust in his teeth, radio static in his right ear, Eli Vance laughing over comms an hour before breach, saying he was buying first round when they got home. Sam had never been built from mythology, whatever frightened interns would tell later. He was built from training, repetition, and the permanent arithmetic of who came back and who did not. Bryce squeezed harder, as if the room's attention were a dare, and Lila's fingers tightened around empty air where the transfer form had been before it skated under the counter. Nora stepped half a pace to the side for camera sightline and kept her voice level, projecting to witness and recording alike. Let the record reflect airway compression is ongoing at 0308. One clerk looked down and began typing with shaking hands. Nora knew Sam's arithmetic because she had seen him in offices where no one performed strength. 38, 6 feet even, shoulders earned by load-bearing years, dark hair cut close with early gray at the temples, hands crossed with old scars that made pen grips awkward on cold mornings. He wore wet NWU Type 3 now, rain still dark at the cuffs, and wore it off base most days because denim felt like pretending. In meetings, he watched doors without meaning to. In restaurants, he sat where exits and service corridors stayed in view. At home, he checked locks twice, then once more after jolting awake at 2:13 when sleep dropped him, and panic pulled him back up. The night in Hellman never stayed in sequence. It came as sound first. Nylon scraping concrete, while his element stacked, coded whisper in his earpiece, a charge set shallow, then the breach turning wrong in one shared second. A secondary device they had not seen converted hallway air into pressure and grit. Eli had been 2 feet ahead, then not ahead at all. Sam felt face and jaw hit plaster and metal, tasted dirt and cordite, heard someone call medevac coordinates with a voice already too far away. Behind him, Atlas's chain clicked once against the wall ring. The dog surged an inch when Lila's shoe slipped and Bryce jerked her sideways, then froze immediately on Sam's palm-down signal, chest vibrating, ears forward. The bailiff closest to the security arch lifted his phone chest high without stepping in. Self-protective movement, still no intervention. Atlas had been 3 then, lean through the ribs, speed and discipline equally sharp. His first handler took shrapnel in a courtyard and dropped lead. Atlas did not break task. He moved to the choke point, held under debris and cross noise, and bought one clean lane for Sam to drag Eli clear. After-action language called it 1 second. 1 second was not small where breathing was counted. Sam found a pulse that was there, then failing, then gone before rotor wash arrived. Atlas stayed planted, through smoke and command changes until the last man cleared. Lila made a wet, involuntary sound as Bryce's forearm shifted higher, and Sam's gaze tracked grip mechanics without moving his feet. Nora was already there verbally, cutting through the room's paralysis. "Deputy, confirm ongoing camera capture. State your time again." The radio crackled. The deputy swallowed and repeated, 0308 and 41. Sam was stitched in a field tent with protocol-limited sedation, 32 stitches from cheek to jaw, and returned before the scar settled because grief did not qualify as leave in that season. Eli's name went on a memorial wall 6 weeks later. Sam stood still while a chaplain read words, too tidy for the man they buried. He folded the memorial program into a cargo pocket and carried it until rain erased ink. He still kept the plastic sleeve. Service gave him function after that, not silence. Retirement made the silence louder. He tried white noise, tried whiskey once and never again, tried performing fine for people who preferred veterans inspirational and uncomplicated. The one thing that held was a tan and black dog who had watched him bleed and required no explanation for what could not be translated into polite words. Bryce spoke through clenched teeth, still framing Atlas as dangerous property even with 14 witnesses and a live camera field. Mint and alcohol drifted off him each time he leaned in. The dark medicinal stain at his right cuff had spread at the seam. Lila's eyes stayed open by force, fixed past him toward Atlas and Sam, refusing the paper he wanted signed. Getting Atlas out of disposition channels had been harder than any firefight because this enemy was paperwork with signatures. 14 months, 3 denied petitions, 1 hearing where county council called Atlas, an asset requiring neutral placement, as if loyalty could be warehoused. Sam sat through each denial with hands flat on his knees so no one would see them shake. He submitted service records, veterinary assessments, handler affidavits, deployment commendations, letters from commanders who wrote for no one. Responses came delayed, redacted, rerouted, fee-stacked. Nora entered on month 5 after a veteran's legal clinic contact said, "You want this one." She reviewed the file and said what she said whenever systems hid behind process. "We do chain of custody on truth." She found missing pages, a sedative authorization logged before the exam it cited, and a behavior code change entered by an administrator who had never met Atlas. Month 12, she filed final appeal with 2 binders and 1 bold statutory line, forcing review inside 10 days. The board granted custody on day 9 with conditions designed to look generous and feel punitive. Sam signed everyone. "Counsel is present," Nora said now, voice clipped and cold, one hand already on her tablet, as she captured faces, positions, and timestamps. "Any further pressure for signature under force will be entered as coercion on camera." 2 interns who had been statues a minute ago began recording the same frame from different angles. When Atlas came home, Sam set a blanket by the bed and a stainless bowl near the back door and tried not to anthropomorphize room checks and lean-ins against his knee. That lasted 3 nights. They were running the same drill in different bodies. Hypervigilance in a man looked like insomnia, and controlled breathing at 2 a.m. In a dog, it looked like ears rotating at hallway noise and a low growl held until threat clarified. Together, it looked less like dysfunction, more like survival with structure. By week 2, Sam logged sleep because Nora told him data beat pride. 19 sleepless nights per month held. He wrote triggers, hospital roof helicopters, fireworks, stairwell slams, courthouse fluorescent hum at night. He wrote what helped. Atlas's weight against his shin, hand on neck, 5-count inhale, 7-count exhale, low lights, no television after 2100. Healing was procedural, not cinematic. Next correct thing while your nervous system argued every step. In Annex B, that history sat under Sam's stillness, like reinforced concrete, while Lila remained under Bryce's grip. He was not calm because he felt nothing. He was calm because panic had killed better men, and because if another hallway asked for him, he had promised it would not find him unready. The deputy heard his own breathing too loud in his earpiece. The bailiff, who had waited for rank to choose courage, first looked at Sam and saw what that waiting cost. The clerk with trembling hands kept typing. The room understood this was not paperwork. Atlas gave a short, sharp exhale and shifted his front paws half an inch, chained tight but controlled, and the second biography in the room came into focus with equal force. 8 years old, male German shepherd, 5 deployments, 23 Americans found alive under rubble and blast dust. Decorated after Yemen under a citation, using the phrase exceptional discrimination, under fire, as if language could carry the full thing. Left hip carrying Taliban shrapnel from Kandahar, lodged too close to nerve pathways to remove cleanly, leaving a weather-sensitive hitch on stairs. Still worked, still alerted first. Bryce's fingers flexed again at Lila's neck, practiced and ugly. Lila coughed once, dry and partial, then pulled another narrow breath. Nora shifted her shoulders toward the nearest bailiff without taking her eyes off Bryce. State that no medical relief has been provided. State time. The deputy, now committed by his own voice, answered into radio. 0309, no relief. People who never saw an MWD in theater mistook obedience for temperament. They called Atlas aggressive when he fixed on a liar. They called him unstable when he refused food from the wrong hand. They read warning posture as defect because they needed a dog to be either pet or weapon, not witness. Lila had read better. So had Sam. Atlas's sequence never changed, not in Yemen dust, not under courthouse fluorescence. Ears forward, body rigid, growl low and controlled, await command, hold line. His record carried moments no plaque ever captured cleanly. In Yemen, after a market-side blast collapsed a stairwell, Atlas flagged avoid thermal cams, dismissed because fuel fire scrambled signatures. Pawed once, pawed twice, froze and stared until engineers rerouted cut. 3 contractors and 1 corpsman came out alive from a space narrower than a doorway. In Afghanistan, he tracked a wounded interpreter through olive groves for 43 minutes under intermittent fire, then lay across the man's legs to keep him still while medics worked. In a mountain village, he detected buried pressure plates on a school path. 6 devices cleared before sunrise. No press release, because most right things in war happen off camera. Annex B's cameras were very much on camera now. Red light steady. 1 intern backed toward the door while speaking quietly into her phone. Probably counsel, probably family, probably both. The custodian, who had stayed frozen against a mop bucket, raised his own device and held it horizontal. Witness passivity was fracturing in real time. The Kandahar wound came on a stairwell turn where angles narrowed and bad luck accelerated. A blast from below sent metal up and out. Atlas took fragment strikes along left flank and hip, spun, recovered, and kept position until extraction. Field notes read mobility preserved with chronic pain expected. Sam read that sentence once and put the file down because expected by whom had no honest answer. Cold mornings, Atlas rose slow, shook out stiffness, moved on. No theatrics, no task loss. If anything, pain sharpened precision. Lila had seen that cost firsthand in intake bays long before this chokehold. She watched Atlas offload weight from left hip when concrete weights ran long. She adjusted exam timing, reduced unnecessary standing intervals, logged every stiffness episode while clerks rolled eyes at special treatment. It was not special, it was competent. Atlas had already paid in labor most humans could not imagine once, let alone across 5 deployments. He should have had predictable meals and quiet floors, not a county wall ring while a privileged man tried to convert him into inventory. Bryce glanced toward the security arch, calculating exits that were narrowing by the minute. Sam did not block his path yet. He only occupied it with certainty. Nora read the glance and said, loud enough for the microphones, "Attempted flight after recorded assault will be included with chain of custody manipulation and coercion count." The line landed. Even Bryce's jaw ticked. Nora understood the legal weight of conversion, which was why she had built a full-service binder no courtroom could dismiss as sentiment. Deployment summaries, commendations, veterinary trauma reports, handler statements, disposition appeal rulings, and chronology of each attempt to reclassify Atlas downward into dangerous property. The pattern was the point. Strip title, strip history, strip personhood from the animal and credibility from anyone protecting him. Move him through channels nobody audited after midnight. Atlas had resisted every part of that strategy by doing what he always did: read threat, hold discipline, protect the vulnerable inside his radius. He had not bitten Bryce in holding when sedatives appeared. He blocked and warned. He had not broken chain in Annex B despite hearing Lila choke and smelling Bryce's cuff. He waited for Sam's hand signal because trust ran deeper than panic. That restraint was not softness. It was the highest control training and war had left in him. The deputy radioed again, stronger now that the words were out and could not be recalled. 0309 and 33, suspect still hands-on, counsel present, cameras active. One clerk nodded without looking up. Another slid the pending verification tray out from under the counter with a pen, exposing the fallen transfer form without touching it. Documentation first. Speak second. Nora caught the movement, angled her tablet, and preserved it. In the corridor pressure, with radios crackling and witnesses finally straightening their spines, Atlas turned his head a few degrees toward Sam, without taking eyes off Bryce's wrist, asking the old operational question in a single glance. Confirm. Sam gave the smallest nod. Atlas held, chest vibrating with contained thunder, decorated veteran dog with shrapnel in his hip, and a case file full of other people's lies, still choosing discipline over chaos while men in suits learned too late that the thing they called evidence had always been the most reliable witness in the building. Bryce's thumb ground harder into the hinge under Lila's jaw, and the sound that came out of her was less a cough than a body trying to negotiate with a blocked airway. Sam heard it and felt Helmand in the back of his teeth, but he did not move too fast and did not move too slow. Fast made people panic. Slow got people killed. He held the middle, boots planted on wet tile, one hand low to Atlas, eyes fixed on the pressure points in Bryce's grip. Every detail in Annex B had changed shape, Now the truth was in the room with names attached. The deputy was no longer a uniform near a metal detector. He was the man who had delayed a call while a medic choked. The interns were no longer students with tablets. They were 6 future attorneys deciding whether they would build careers on silence or record. The 3 clerks, the 2 bailiffs, the custodian with the mop, all of them were standing inside chain of custody, and for the first time, they looked like they knew it. Lila's knees slid on polished floor. The left one hit first, then dragged, squeaking against tile. She grabbed Bryce's sleeve and felt that damp crescent at his cuff again, medicinal and sharp, and the pattern she had documented for 6 months snapped into one clear line. Forged intake signatures, sedatives logged before authorization, dangerous property, stamped on decorated service dogs. Atlas disappearing next if she signed. She tasted blood at the back of her throat and forced her eyes open wider. She refused to let the room blur into only pain. She found the evidence tray under the counter, the torn transfer form half visible, with county seal exposed, and she held that image like a life-saving float. Paper existed, camera existed, Nora existed, Sam existed, Atlas existed. Across from her, Bryce was still talking, because men raised inside immunity believed words could reassert gravity. "You are all watching obstruction," he barked at the room. "She's interfering with a lawful surrender order." His sunglasses had slipped down a fraction from the motion, revealing eyes shot with alcohol and anger. He shoved them back up with his free hand and tightened his grip again, performing certainty for an audience that had stopped applauding. No one in Annex B believed him now. Not fully. Not after Nora's on-record statements. Not with Lila's face modeling in front of them and Atlas locked in that exact restrained posture, trained for controlled violence under command. From the 3:08 pressure point, the standoff dragged in hard increments, 10 seconds, then 30, then another full minute with Bryce still squeezing and no decisive intervention. At 3:10 a.m., the wall clock clicked forward, and the small mechanical sound landed like a deadline. Atlas's ears were forward and fixed. His body was a drawn cable from shoulders to tail. The tan and black saddleback that turned gold in sunlight and dark as iron in shadow looked almost black under courthouse fluorescence, as if the night had climbed onto him and stayed. He gave one low growl, measured and continuous, the same register he had carried in hallways where explosives were possible and visibility was nothing but dust and instinct. Sam's palm stayed down. Hold. Atlas held. Nora shifted one step to Sam's left, opening her line to both camera domes. "Bailiff Martinez," she said without raising volume, "you are now personally witnessing airway compression during a contested evidence transfer. Say what you see." The older bailiff flinched at being named, glanced at Bryce, then at the red camera light. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. "I see a male subject with his hand on her throat," he said, voice rough. "State if she can speak." "She cannot speak clearly?" "State if medical aid has been provided." "No." Each answer stripped one more layer of administrative fog from the corridor. Bryce jerked Delilah half upright, then back down, trying to break the rhythm Nora had created. "You don't direct this room," he snapped at her. "My family funds this annex. My father can have your license gone by noon." He threw the threat like a switchblade he had used 100 times. Nora did not blink. "Keep talking," she said. "Cameras love complete statements." Sam took one step closer, and the room tightened around him like wire. He was close enough now to see fine tremor in Bryce's forearm from exertion and adrenaline. Close enough to see Lila's capillary refill slowing at the lips. Close enough to smell whiskey beneath mint and the medicinal note at the cuff that matched the entries Lila had flagged. The arithmetic had narrowed. One command, one window, one outcome, if Bryce chose badly. Sam's voice came out flat and cold, the way it had in breach corridors when panic needed to obey. "Let her go." 3 words. Nothing extra. No threat wrapped around them, no explanation. Just command. Bryce stared at him, then laughed with an edge that broke halfway through. "Who are you supposed to be?" he said. "My father owns this courthouse." He had no idea he had just announced his shield 1 sentence before it cracked. Sam did not answer the name drop because hierarchy games were for men who still believed this was social. He kept his eyes on Bryce's hand and said nothing. The silence did more damage than argument. It told everyone in Annex B the power equation had moved and would not move back. Bryce looked for reinforcement and found none. The deputy was on radio. 1 clerk was typing continuously. 2 interns had their cameras up. The custodian had stopped shaking and was recording from near the vending machines, mop abandoned against the wall. Even the younger bailiff had stepped off his original position and angled toward Lila's blind side. Late but moving. Lila dragged in a ragged inch of air when Bryce's fingers shifted and felt the scrape in her throat like glass. She heard Sam's command echo in her head and felt Atlas at the edge of her vision, a fixed line of force waiting to be pointed. She had worked trauma long enough to know when rooms changed phase. This one had. Fear was still present, but it had changed owners. Bryce saw it too, and panic made him stupid. He wrenched Lila forward and used her body as a half-shield, rotating so Sam had to choose angles. "Back off," he said, voice higher now. "This dog already attacked me. I have the ER report. I have the order. You don't touch me." Atlas rose, not a lunge, not chaos. He came up onto his hind legs with controlled lift, front paws hovering inches above tile, chest broad, chain drawn taut in a straight steel line to the wall ring. The sound of links under load rang through Annex B like struck metal. His growl deepened from a warning to imminent action, and every person in that corridor felt it in their ribs. Sam's hand made a 2-finger adjustment, minute and precise. Atlas locked in place at full height, trembling with discipline. Bryce finally looked directly into the dog's eyes, and then, because fear seeks human explanation, into Sam's. What he found there was not rage. Rage he understood. Rage could be baited, filmed, and litigated. What he saw instead was winter calm, a professional stillness that did not ask permission and did not bluff. It was the expression of someone who had already run the scenario to conclusion and would execute whichever branch Bryce selected next. For the first time that night, Bryce's confidence broke clean. His pupils widened. His jaw unlatched a fraction. The hand on Lila's throat lost pressure by degrees he could not hide. Sam saw the release and took half a step, enough to own space, not enough to trigger flinch aggression. "Down," he said softly to Atlas. Atlas dropped to all fours at once, silent except for breath, eyes never leaving Bryce's wrist. The control in that movement did what shouting never could. It told the room, beyond argument, who had training and who had impulse. Bryce tried one last bluff, voice fraying at the edges. "You think this ends with me?" he hissed. "You touch me, and this county buries all of you. My father owns the cops, the hospital, all of it." "Record that," Nora said, turning slightly toward the nearest intern without taking her eyes off Bryce. Word for word. The blue-tie intern, the one who had scrolled while Lila choked, swallowed hard and nodded. "Recorded," he whispered. A sharp buzz sounded from the security arch as an outer door cycled open. Footsteps approached at speed from the far corridor. Additional deputies called late. finally arriving to a scene no one could spin back into routine. Bryce heard them and recalculated in real time, options collapsing. He tried to drag Lila backward toward the intake gate. She planted one sneaker, then the other, and twisted her shoulders with the same compact leverage she had taught combative patients to break holds in triage. Not enough to free herself, enough to turn his wrist outward. Sam moved on that angle. One hand caught Bryce's forearm at tendon line, the other braced Lila's shoulder and pulled her clear in a single practiced motion. No strike, no flourish, just separation. The moment Bryce lost contact with her throat, Lila dropped to both knees and sucked air in hard, coughing until sound came back raw and thin. The first word she forced out was not a plea, it was evidence. "Cuff," she rasped, pointing at Bryce's sleeve. "Ketamine." Nora was already there. "Deputy, secure his right cuff as trace evidence," she said. "Do not let him contaminate it." Bryce yanked against Sam's grip and got nowhere. Up close, Sam's face looked carved from old fatigue and intent, rain drying in dark patches across his camouflage, jaw scar pale under fluorescent light. Bryce pulled once more, desperate and performative, then stopped when he realized he could not move the arm. He looked again at Sam's eyes, searching for hesitation, and found none. That was the instant he understood he was no longer negotiating with clerks and favors. He was inside a record controlled by people who knew exactly what to do with records. "Martinez, ring clip," Sam said, still controlling Bryce's arm. "Transfer lead to me." The older bailiff moved in, crossed to the wall point, and unclipped Atlas's chain from the intake ring with both hands visible under the camera dome. He passed the freed lead across to Sam, who caught it short without taking his eyes off Bryce. Atlas stepped to Sam's left knee and stood there like a living barrier, head level, chest still vibrating with low residual warning. When Lila reached toward him with shaking fingers, he leaned just enough to press his muzzle against her wrist, 1 second of contact, then reset to watch. The additional deputies entered Annex B and slowed when they saw camera lights, phones raised, Nora Pike poised with statute-ready precision, Bryce held and breathing hard, and Sam Barrett standing in wet NWU Type 3 with a decorated German Shepherd at heel and no uncertainty anywhere in his posture. Nora lifted her chin toward the evidence counter, toward the torn transfer form, toward the logs, toward Bryce's stained cuff, and began laying out commands in exact order, each one a pin locking the night into place. "Start with his cuff," Nora said, and her voice cut clean through the overlapping radio chatter. "Gloves on, paper bag, not plastic, preserve residue." The first deputy to reach Bryce hesitated for half a heartbeat, eyes flicking to Bryce's face, to Sam's grip, to the camera dome. Then training finally outran fear. He snapped on nitrile gloves, took Bryce's right wrist, and held it out while a second deputy slid a clean paper evidence bag over the sleeve and sealed it at the elbow. Bryce jerked once and spat, "You're done in this county." But the words landed flat. Handcuffs closed over his wrists with a metallic click that sounded like a door locking from the right side this time. At 3:12 a.m., Bailiff Martinez read the arrest advisement aloud while Lila stayed on her knees, coughing and drawing in air in ragged pulls. Atlas stood at Sam's left leg, chain now in Sam's hand, chest still vibrating with a low warning. Sam crouched beside Lila without taking his eyes off Bryce and passed 2 fingers lightly along the side of her neck, checking airway swelling, capillary response, speech effort, field habits, no wasted movement. "Can you speak?" he asked. "Barely," she rasped, "but yes." "Dizzy?" "Yes." "Stay down." Nora was already building the record. Clerk Station 2 retrieved the torn transfer form from under the gate with tongs, filmed the retrieval, Do not touch the signature line. She turned toward the biohazard tray. And those 3 syringes get tagged now. Lot numbers visible on camera. The clerk who had picked up the phone and set it down earlier swallowed hard and nodded. Her hands shook as she reached for evidence tongs, then steadied when she heard herself saying the words she should have said an hour ago. Item 1, torn transfer order, county seal visible, unsigned. She lifted the page and froze. There's indentation pressure on the line from attempted force signature. Good, Nora said. Bag it. The printer that had spit 3 pages in the corridor whirred again as if on cue. The blue-tie intern flinched at the sound, then walked to the output tray and brought the sheets over with both hands. These were cued at 3:06, he said, voice thin. I saw the timestamp. He looked at Bryce and then away. It's the bite narrative. It says attack occurred at 3:14. Silence hit the room for 1 hard second. The report had been written before the minute it claimed. Nora took the pages, held them under camera, and nodded once. Pre-written incident statement. Mark as item 2. At 3:18, Judge Halverson appeared on the annex monitor in a robe thrown over a collared shirt, face gray with interrupted sleep and sudden understanding. He had signed the emergency surrender order 2 hours earlier from a thin affidavit and an ER summary. Now he was looking at a live assault victim, an arrestee in cuffs, and a lawyer building a chain of custody wall brick by brick. Bryce lifted his chin toward the screen. Judge, this is unlawful detention. My father— Be quiet, Halverson said. Nora stepped into frame. Your Honor, we request immediate suspension of the surrender order, emergency medical clearance for Ms. Moreno, preservation order for all Annex B and elevator footage from 2:30 to present, and seizure of controlled substances in intake. Halverson nodded once. Granted pending review. Nora did not stop. And one clarifying question for the record. She turned just enough that the camera caught Bryce, the clerk logbook, and the clock together. If Atlas was already in county control at 2:40, why does elevator camera show Mr. Sutherland carrying veterinary ketamine into evidence at 2:52? No one answered. Then the deputy at the metal detector, the one who had stared at the ceiling, cleared his throat like gravel. Because he came through my post with a gray vet pouch, he said. I waved him. No manifest? He stared at his own boots. I logged nothing. Halverson's face hardened. Name. The deputy gave it. Badge surrendered at end of shift, Halverson said. Internal Affairs notified now. The clerk in Station 3 broke next. He told us to pre-log Atlas as transferred, she whispered, tears starting before she could stop them. At 2:44. Said legal had cleared it. We entered intake signatures before the dog was surrendered. Who is we? Nora asked. Me, Deputy Raines, and Clerk Nolan. Martinez looked sick. The younger bailiff, who had waited for someone else to choose courage, first stared straight ahead and said nothing. He never volunteered more, not that night, not later, and his silence made its own entry in the record. By 3:31, Lila was on a gurney in the courthouse triage room with ice at her throat while a county medic checked laryngeal bruising and oxygen saturation. She kept pointing toward Atlas every 30 seconds until Sam stepped into her line of sight, and she could see the dog standing. I'm here, Sam said. He's here. Nora called 3 numbers from the hallway in full earshot of witnesses. Internal Affairs, the State Veterinary Board duty line, and County Compliance. At 3:36, Compliance called back, the same office that had sent data inconsistency noted. No immediate action. This time the voice was clipped and formal. We are opening a Level 1 integrity review and preserving all digital logs, the director said. No deletions authorized. Say that again on recorded line, Nora replied, and the director repeated every word. At 4:02, the elevator footage loaded on a courthouse tablet. Grainy, fixed angle, undeniable. Bryce in leather jacket and sunglasses, gray pouch in hand, entering restricted corridor at 2:52. Exiting at 2:57 without the pouch. 4 minutes later, the first sedation entry appeared in the log under initials that mimicked Lila's handwriting and missed her pressure pattern exactly where she had said they would. Halverson reconvened by video at 4:11, with a prosecutor now fully awake and no appetite for family influence. He vacated the surrender order on the record, cited fraudulent affidavit support, and remanded Bryce Sutherland on felony assault, evidence tampering, and animal cruelty counts. The deputy and 2 clerks tied to falsified intake signatures were placed on immediate administrative suspension before sunrise. At 6:20 a.m., with cold light starting to bleed through the courthouse glass, Grant Sutherland arrived in a Navy overcoat and tried to push through the security lane by force of reputation. "I need my son released now," he said. The supervisor at the desk, new shift, older woman, silver hair in a tight knot, didn't look up from her terminal. "You can take a seat, sir." "My name is on this building." She finally looked at him then, expression flat. "Today, it's on Exhibit A through F." By 9:05 a.m., in the hospital board conference room, with his surname carved into the frosted wall, Grant watched the county attorney place printed stills on polished wood. Elevator timestamp, cuff residue analysis, prelim positive for ketamine, pre-written bite report with impossible timestamp, forged intake lines. 2 board members who had owed him campaigns and favors looked at the papers and shifted their chairs away from him, as if influence were contagious in reverse. Motion carried. Conflict review open, contract disbursements frozen. Emergency vote on his chairmanship passed before he finished his second objection. By noon, the brushed steel letters, Sutherland Memorial Hospital Wing, were covered by maintenance paper, under order pending donor fraud inquiry. It wasn't dramatic, no crowd, no speech. Just 2 workers on ladders and a roll of neutral gray wrap, sealing a name out of sight, while administrators walked faster than usual and avoided eye contact. At 12:47 p.m., Sam walked Atlas through the side gate of the County K 9-yard, under a sky scrubbed clean by last night's rain. Lila stood waiting with a soft brace at her throat, and Mateo tucked at her side in a sweatshirt, 2 sizes too big, dinosaur patch peeling at one corner. The boy looked from the dog to Sam, then to his aunt's bruised neck, and his jaw tightened in a way no 9-year-old should need to learn. Lila crouched slowly, winced, and held out her hand. Atlas stepped forward, sniffed, and pressed his muzzle to her palm. She closed her fingers into his fur and breathed once, steady this time. "Thank you," she whispered to Atlas first. Then she looked up at Sam. "And thank you." Mateo took one careful step closer. "Can I say hi?" Sam nodded. "Open hand. Let him come to you." The boy did, palm flat, shoulders square with effort. Atlas sniffed, then leaned his forehead gently into Mateo's chest. Mateo laughed once, small, surprised, and wrapped both arms around the dog's neck without squeezing. Lila's eyes filled and stayed full. Sam clipped the lead loose and let it hang. No wall ring, no intake post, no chain under load. Atlas turned from Mateo, moved into Sam's space, and pressed his head hard against Sam's chest, just below the scar line. The same way he had done after flights, after nightmares, after every corridor that ended with somebody breathing because they held the line together. Sam's hand went to the back of Atlas's neck and stayed there. Not command, not correction. Contact. Nora came through the gate with a thick envelope and handed it to Lila. "Certified copies," she said. "Order vacated, charges filed, preservation directives. Your prior reports appended to the criminal packet." She tapped the front page. "Your 6 months of documentation are now primary evidence, not ignored correspondence." Lila took the envelope with both hands like it weighed more than paper. "What about the other dogs?" Nora's mouth set in a hard line. "Disposition pipeline is suspended pending audit. 12 dogs accounted for by noon check, and the last 2 from old transfers were located under the emergency warrants and moved into verified state custody." She looked at Atlas, then back to Lila. "State Task Force has assumed the remaining case files, and this pipeline investigation is formally concluded. No one can relabel him now. That part is over." In the quiet that followed, the night custodian from Annex B appeared at the fence in work gloves, cap in both hands. And he looked at Lila and spoke to the ground. "I should have moved sooner," he said. "I gave my statement. I saw him rinse a vial in the intake sink at 2:55. He looked up, eyes wet and stubborn. "I won't take that back." Lila nodded once. "Thank you for saying it now." By 1:20 p.m., sunlight hit Atlas's coat and turned the tan along his shoulders to warm gold, while the black saddle stayed dark as iron. He lifted his head, ears forward, not rigid anymore, just listening to ordinary sounds. A gate latch, a distant siren, Mateo's shoes scuffing gravel, Lila breathing without panic. Atlas had never been the evidence they tried to store. He had been the witness they tried to silence, and he was still standing. If you're listening to this and wondering whether records matter, remember Annex B at 3:07 a.m., when one question turned a family name into evidence and a working dog walked back out alive.